Hello again. This is Satan's Trilogy, and this is Book 2, Chapter 2, and this will be reading 57. I am the author and the narrator. Please sit back, relax, as the story unfolds. Everyone helped to clean off the table, and in no time at all, Esther and Day had the dishes washed and put away. This was a group of very smart and sharp girls, but everyone needs sleep. Esther helped each girl find her place to sleep and made certain that each was comfortable as they all fell into their places and quickly found slumber. Raven and Riley Grace were in Esther's bed. Esther had forewarned them that their dreams would overlap. With everyone sleeping, Day looked at Esther and said, "I know that you want to go back out. Can I come with you?" Day smiled at Esther with her best effort at pleading eyes. Esther smiled. "You are beginning to know me very well. Of course my sister can come with me. I had planned on your being with me. I want to show you off to some dear friends of mine." Day looked awake and not nearly ready for bed that night. Like Esther, Day needed only 4 or 5 hours of sleep to feel rested and ready for the day. Day was excited. "Where are we going?" asked Day. Esther smiled, but with some concern in her face. "I have arranged a late-night meeting with my cousin Chen. We will discuss my cousins that attempted to rob our father's store." Day's mood changed, and she suddenly understood that this meeting would decide many things for the young cousins of Esther. The evening had cooled down, and so Day slipped into some black hose that offered some warmth, along with her knee-high boots, denim, black shorts, and black cotton blouse, covered by a black leather jacket. Day came into the living room, having finished dressing, and proclaimed herself ready. Esther looked at her sister. "Wow, I love your clothes. Do you remember that you showered earlier tonight? You don't have your makeup on." Day immediately panicked. "Oh my gosh, what the heck?" She ran back into the bathroom. Esther chuckled and went to the kitchen to check on several meal preparations that she had in progress. Esther had already dressed and was wearing white patent leather boots with 2-inch heels. The boots were ankle length. Esther had chosen a soft white silk, loose-fitting slacks, complemented by a white sleeveless blouse made of silk with golden threads running through the material. And on the sofa was a leather jacket, white, with a white zipper. The jacket was short and only reached the top of her slacks. Esther had decided to wear a pearl necklace tonight. The sisters certainly looked like salt and pepper, but the bond was apparent and undeniable. After about a dozen minutes, Esther returned. "Thank you, Esther. I never go out without my makeup." They had painted her face with dark gray eyeshadow and black eyeliner that extended a bit farther out than usual. A pale foundation with black lipstick. It was a bit more morbid than usual, but she felt rushed, and this was how it turned out. The Mustang was at the front parking spot. Day and Esther quickly jumped in. The two girls discussed the family business and the near future as well as the far future. Few things can be resolved in a car ride, but as they pulled into Cousin Chen's driveway, both girls were on the same page with many subjects. Stepping away from the Mustang, Esther and Day walked up a long brick walkway and were met by a dozen young men. Esther smiled and offered them a friendly greeting. Cousins, it is so good to see you since you helped move me into my new apartment. This is my sister Day. The young men bowed at Day and greeted her. Then one cousin spoke up. It is wonderful to see you again, but our father asked that you come quickly when you arrived. Please come this way. Esther and Day followed the young men into the entryway of a large home with many traditional Chinese furnishings. Opening a large bamboo double door, Esther found Mr. Chen sitting at a long table and the three cousins positioned on their knees in the center of the room. Esther and Day walked into the room and were greeted by Cousin Chen. With deep, grievous expression, Cousin Chen expressed his shame that some of his family had dishonored him. Esther smiled softly at her cousin, bowed to him, then moved forward, giving him a hug. As Esther stepped back, she introduced Day as her sister. It was our father that allowed me to deal with my cousins. Cousin Chen asked Esther and Day to take a seat. We will offer you an apology and sacrifice, whatever is necessary, to remove this dishonor. Cousin Chen turned to his children on their knees in the center of the floor. Speaking with a disappointed tone of voice, Mr. Chen told his children, "Please explain yourselves to Esther and her sister Day." With heads bowed, all three apologized, asking forgiveness for their poor behavior and having offended Esther and her family. A long pause was felt in the room. Cousin Chen leaned to Esther and whispered softly to her, "I apologize for them. I know that what they have offered is not a real apology. Please, Esther, if you will, teach my children a lesson. I love them, but they no longer listen to me." Esther and her uncle turned towards the three young men kneeling before them. Esther looked at them, smiled, and then spoke. "I want to know how the three of you ended up deciding to bring guns into a store to rob the owner. Tell me, why did this happen?" Mr. Chen's oldest, Z, looked up at Esther, and then he looked down at the floor and he explained why they did this. "My father is a good man. He works hard. He wants us to work hard and earn money for the things we want. I am fine with this, but no one wants to hire young Chinese men. I am 18 years old, and I am not interested in making hamburgers at McDonald's. I have looked for work, but I am only offered jobs at the lowest of positions and for minimum wage." Z's voice was failing. He was obviously disturbed by his plight. He thought that he deserved better. Esther spoke again. "For most of my life, I lived without material things. My father and my teachers were what I valued most. Family is where you will find your greatest happiness. If you wish to remove this shame from our family, then you must work 6 months for my adopted father, Mr. Ho." All three young men looked up at Esther as she continued to speak. "My father is going to expand our store, and we will need additional help. You will be paid minimum wage for 6 months. I want my three cousins to work together for my father. Come to the store tomorrow night at 4 o'clock and be ready to work." Esther stood, as did her Uncle Chen. She bowed to her uncle and walked around to her three cousins. Bowing to each cousin, she reached out with her right hand to each cousin and grabbed their shoulder. Pulling them close, Esther whispered into their ear a word of encouragement. Esther and Day left Cousin Chen's home, saying very little else. Day asked as they reached the car, "Esther, how do you know that we can use them tomorrow? As they both sat in the car and buckled up their safety belts, Esther responded, "Her father is very wise. He had agreed to expand the store with a guaranteed loan. I happen to know the loan will be approved and immediately." Esther grinned at Day, smiling and sitting back as she explained, "Her father's store does more than provide an income for our father. It provides a service to the neighborhood and jobs for the young. If we expand the store, we can be pleased with ourselves. It is a win-win for everyone." Day listened to Esther and commented, "I agree, and I know that Dad is going to be thrilled to expand the store. But are you certain that he'll want to hire your 3 cousins?" Turning to Day, Esther said, "Her father is very wise. He will see the wisdom and beauty of this and welcome it." "Day, I want to ask a serious question," said Esther. Day was caught off guard with this sudden change in tone from Esther and quickly replied, "What is it, Esther?" Esther said, "Our father is trained in self-defense. He doesn't fear any person. Why did he not give the same skills to you?" Esther's voice had softened and perhaps drifted off as she was asking for an explanation that she didn't yet understand. Day waited a minute, gathering her thoughts. "You see, Esther, my mother was born in Korea, and she did not believe that girls should learn such things. When her health started to fail, she made my father promise not to train me in martial arts. My mother wanted me to be raised as a girl ready for marriage and to serve a man." "Esther," said Day, "I know very little of my mother, but I know that she had been raised in a different time and a different country. I sometimes feel that she would not agree with a lot that I have done. The expectations of children in the Far East is dramatically different from what is expected in this country. My mother thought she knew the best for me, but had she lived longer, perhaps she would have changed her mind." Esther nodded in agreement. "She sounds truly like a wonderful person." Day continued with another thought. "Know that my father deeply loved my mother, and the pledge she made him take is one that he will never break." Esther understood. She had witnessed many examples of old world cultures clashing with choices of right and wrong in today's world. Esther pulled into the parking place at that moment, and the girls quickly jumped out. Esther and Day went to the apartment and slowly opened the door, being as quiet as they could. They prepared the sofa couch for sleep. Esther tossed a blanket on the sofa once it was opened, and then she laid several more blankets at one end of the sofa, placing several pillows at the other end. They were ready for bed. Esther looked at Day. "I need to exercise my body before showering. Would you like to watch?" Day seemed to become more alert and excited at the thought of watching Esther exercise. Though inseparable as sisters, they had never watched Esther practice her evening exercise. Day quickly responded, "Oh yes, I would be thrilled to watch." Esther took Day's hand and led her to the extra room. In the corner was a simple chair. Esther looked at Day. "Please sit there and do not move until I have finished. This will take 60 minutes, but you will not realize the time has passed until I touch you." Day looked puzzled, yet did not ask any questions. She was ready to watch her sister practice her martial arts skills. Esther went to the 3 corners of the room opposite of Day and lit a small candle at each. At the bedroom entrance, she slowly closed the door and shut off the dim ceiling light. Esther moved to the center of the room and stood still with her arms to her side. Then slowly she raised her arms in front of her and made a triangular shape with her fingers and quickly brought her hands down to her side again. She again bowed towards the door. They looked at the doorway and for the first time noticed a small photo of someone in a rather old-looking picture frame. Esther started to move. Her legs went the opposite directions of her arms, and her fists often paused slightly in the air as she softly released air from her lungs. The movement of her fists was hypnotizing, and as she made large circles in the air with them, Esther's feet were often thrust out to the front, sometimes behind her. As they pierced the air they moved through, the movements became a blur in a matter of minutes. Day watched Esther put out the candle flames using her feet and her fists, but without touching them. Somehow the speed of her body had created a draft that blew the flames out. The room was dark, and before Day knew it, Esther had turned on the dim ceiling light and was touching Day on the shoulder. Smiling, Esther said, "It's been 1 hour. My exercise is over. You lost awareness of time because you watched my hands as they hypnotized you." Esther looked into her sister's eyes. You must always watch the eyes of any attacker, never their hands. Esther smiled at Day. "I'm ready for bed. That is, after a quick, warm shower." "Do you want to shower with me?" asked Esther. Day quickly responded, "Of course. I feel the night's dust all over me. I always shower before bed, as well as in the morning." In the shower, Day and Esther lathered their bodies and hair with a generous amount of shampoo and quickly rinsed off. Day said, "Let me dry your back." As Day patted Esther's back with the soft bath towel, she commented, "Your dragon is very beautiful." Esther turned to Day. "The dragon was a wonderful gift, but it nearly killed me." Day looked puzzled as Esther continued. "The dyes used were organic and applied in such a large amount in a very short period, causing me to go into a coma. I had many terrible dreams while fighting a fever." Esther turned around to Day and added, "Fortunately, the artist understood how to prevent severe infection." Day said, "It was worth it, wasn't it?" Esther smiled. "My teacher told me that in life you must accept your path and not to bother thinking about the what-ifs. The dragon is part of me now, and I believe it was meant to be. Destiny, if you will." Esther smiled. Both girls were ready for sleep. The couch had already been turned into their bed. Day and Esther laid down and were asleep within minutes. Day's left arm was around Esther's waist as Esther laid with her back to Day and faced the center of the room. Esther's last movement was to move her hair away from her ear. She needed total clarity of the sounds around her, even while sleeping. Esther would awaken if there was a sound not correct to her surroundings. Though it was Monday, there was no school. Teachers had a special convention to attend, so no one felt compelled to move quickly in the morning except for Esther. She had been up for some time preparing for what would be a memorable breakfast. The smell of bacon, scrambled eggs, and hot biscuits drove everyone from their beds and into the kitchen, where Esther was alert and making breakfast for her guests. Raven and Riley Grace entered the kitchen first. They looked wide awake and very hungry. "Good morning," said Esther. "So how did the two of you sleep in my bed?" Riley Grace spoke first. "It was wonderful. My sister saved my life and stopped people from hurting me." Raven smiled at Riley Grace. "In my dream, you saved my life and stopped many people from hurting me." Esther smiled at them. "I told you your dreams would be the same. You both had the same dream of the other protecting you. You're sisters, and you can always depend on the other as Day and I do." Esther was finishing the gravy made from bacon grease. She stopped to look at Raven and Riley Grace. "Breakfast is ready in 6 minutes." Esther smiled as she poured the gravy into a large gravy bowl. "Pull up a chair at the table if you're ready," said Esther. At that moment, Helen, Chris, and Eve entered the room from Esther's end of the apartment, and Aunt Brandy walked into the room from her end of the apartment. Brandy was dressed for work and seemed fully awake and appeared to be feeling good. Esther looked about and said, "Wow, everyone is up at the same time. That is wonderful, because breakfast is ready in 3 minutes." Esther turned to her aunt. "Good morning, Aunt Brandy. You look wonderful this morning. You appear to be on top of the world." Esther laughed as she said this. Aunt Brandy stretched out her arms to her side while saying, "I feel so wonderful. Yesterday was great, and last night was the most fun I've had in a long time." Brandy turned to each girl in the room and greeted them individually with a good morning wish. Then turned again to Esther. "You know, Esther, it's easy to jump out of bed when you know a fantastic breakfast is waiting, and this morning smells every bit as good as any other day." Brandy sat at the table with Raven and Riley Grace, quickly followed by Helen, Chris, and Eve. Day was helping Esther by setting the table and positioning the dishes. Day sat at the table, followed by Esther placing a large platter of biscuits at the center of the table. Esther smiled at everyone across the table and said, "Family and friends, what a wonderful way to begin a day." Esther pulled the cloth off the biscuits and said, "Let's eat." All right, that's the end of reading 57. I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, please be safe and take care.